Something didn't feel right long before the final score told the story, because this wasn't just another ugly loss. It wasn't just a bad matchup or a rough day at the office. What unfolded on that field looked like something far more unsettling, like a team that had quietly checked out while the game was still being played. You could see it in the body language. You could see it in the missed assignments, the slow reactions, the way momentum vanished and never came back. And if you were watching closely, it didn't look like confusion. It looked like resignation. That's what made everything that came out afterwards so jarring. Behind the scenes, one of the most respected veterans in that locker room finally spoke up, not with excuses, not with finger-pointing, but with comments that revealed far more than they seemed to on the surface. At the same time, Cleveland media, people who watch this team every single day, started saying out loud what fans had been afraid to admit, that players had quit, that the season was effectively over, that belief had vanished. And right in the middle of all of it is a rookie quarterback taking hit after hit, saying almost nothing, and somehow becoming the calmest presence in a situation that feels completely out of control. Because here's where this story gets uncomfortable. You have a veteran lineman pushing through pain just to be out there. You have a rookie quarterback who, according to his teammates, hasn't complained once despite chaos all around him. And then you have conflicting stories, shifting explanations, and moments that simply don't add up. Stories that have people inside and outside the organization quietly asking the same question: who's actually telling the truth? What makes this even more unsettling is how rare this kind of public frustration is from people who cover the Browns for a living. These aren't emotional fans on social media. These are professionals who usually choose their words carefully. Yet now they're openly saying they stopped taking notes mid-game, that they felt the team had already given up, that accountability is missing, that something is broken at a deeper level. And once that kind of language starts coming out, it's usually not about one game. It's about something that's been building for a long time. Because when players stop fighting, when media members stop believing, and when fans feel numb instead of angry, that's not a slump, that's a collapse. And what happens next can define a franchise for years. But the most revealing part of all of this didn't happen on the field. It happened in the explanations afterward. A wristband, a miscommunication, a card that fell out. 3 different stories about the same moment, and none of them fully line up. And once you hear how those stories clash and who's caught in the middle of it all, the bigger picture starts to come into focus. While everything around him seemed to be unraveling, one thing was impossible to ignore. Joel Bitonio was still out there.
Not at full strength, not even close. This is a veteran who was dealing with injuries serious enough that many expected him not to play at all. Yet when the game kicked off, there he was, lining up, taking snaps, and pushing through pain in a situation where plenty of others might have protected themselves and stepped aside. And that matters, because Betonio isn't just another name on the roster. He's one of the longest tenured players on the team, a locker room cornerstone, the kind of guy younger players watch closely, especially when things are falling apart. After the game, when reporters asked him about the battered offensive line and the constant shuffling up front, his response wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was matter of fact. He talked about being banged up in practice, about guys being forced into action without reps, about simply trying to survive and hold things together. No grand excuses, no blaming, just a quiet acknowledgement that the unit was hurting and doing whatever it could to function. And that's what made his comments stand out. Because even in a game where the offensive line struggled badly, and even with clips circulating online showing him losing balance or blocking air, Betonio never distanced himself from the mess. He didn't hide behind the injury. He didn't pretend the tape wouldn't speak for itself. He owned it, while still making it clear that being hurt wasn't an excuse to disappear. Then he said something that cut straight to the core of what leadership actually looks like. He talked about his mentality, about how if he can play, he's going to play, about how it's never really a question for him, not because he's trying to be heroic, but because he can't live with letting himself or his teammates down, even if he's not 100%, even if the situation around him is messy, even if the season is slipping away. That kind of mindset doesn't show up in box scores, but inside a locker room, it carries weight, and the contrast was hard to miss. While some players looked disengaged as the game wore on, Betonio was still trying to steady things, still trying to compete, still trying to hold the line together in a situation that felt increasingly hopeless. At one point, he was even seen trying to calm teammates down after a turnover, chasing the play while acting as a voice of reason. That image alone says more than any stat ever could. Because when a veteran is doing that, when he's hurt, frustrated, and still trying to lead, it exposes something else. It draws a sharp line between guys who are still fighting and a team that collectively might not be anymore. And that's why what Betonio said next mattered even more, because when the conversation shifted away from himself and on to the rookie quarterback standing behind that broken pocket, his words revealed just how deep the divide inside this team might really be. When the focus shifted to the quarterback, Joel Bitonio's tone didn't change, but the weight of what he said did. Because in the middle of an offense that's been battered, reshuffled, and openly criticized, he described a rookie who has done the exact opposite of what many would expect. No frustration, no visible sulking, no subtle shots at teammates or coaches. According to
Betonio, Shedeur Sanders has never complained once. Not privately, not publicly, not even when the hits kept coming. And that detail matters more than it sounds. This isn't a quarterback being protected by a clean pocket and a stable system. This is a rookie operating behind an offensive line that's been in survival mode. Scrambles that turn into collisions, pocket breakdowns that leave him exposed, plays that never really have a chance to develop. And yet, every time he gets up, he goes right back to the huddle with the same mindset. Make the next play. That's what Betonio emphasized. Not stats, not excuses, just resilience. He talked about the hits Sanders takes, big ones, the kind that make veterans wince. And instead of looking to the sideline or showing frustration, Sanders just gets back up and keeps moving forward, keeps his head down, keeps trying to make something happen. In a situation where it would be easy, almost expected for a rookie to crack, he hasn't. For a locker room, that speaks volumes, because quarterbacks set the emotional temperature of a team. When a rookie starts pointing fingers, that energy spreads fast. But when a rookie absorbs pressure quietly, it forces everyone else to look in the mirror. And when a veteran lineman feels compelled to publicly praise that mindset, it's usually because it's standing out in contrast to something else. Betonio didn't say Sanders was perfect. He didn't pretend the offense was functioning smoothly. What he did say was that Sanders deserves better support, that the team around him needs to improve. And that subtle shift from talking about effort to talking about responsibility is where the message really landed. Because he's never complained once isn't just a compliment, it's a comparison. It raises an uncomfortable question without ever asking it directly. If the rookie quarterback can keep pushing through chaos without saying a word, why does everything around him feel so unstable? Why do explanations keep changing? Why does accountability seem so hard to find? And this is where things start to feel upside down. The youngest player in the huddle is acting like the most composed professional in the room, while the structure meant to protect him appears to be cracking. That's not how it's supposed to work, and everyone inside that building knows it. Which is why, as praise for Sanders continued to grow, the conversation outside the locker room started to turn darker. Because while the rookie kept showing up, the people watching this team every week began to wonder if the rest of the roster still was. It didn't start with a headline. It didn't come from a viral clip or a heated post online. It came from the people who are usually the most careful with their words, the ones whose job depends on access, relationships, and credibility.
Cleveland media finally said out loud what fans had been feeling in their gut. They didn't dress it up. They didn't soften it. They said the players had quit. And when that word comes from someone who covers a team every single day, it lands differently. This wasn't an emotional fan reaction in the middle of a losing season. This was a professional admitting that at some point during the game, there was nothing left worth documenting. One media member openly said he stopped taking notes in the third quarter, not because he was bored, but because the effort on the field had completely evaporated. Think about how extreme that is. These reporters sit through blowouts, they sit through ugly losses, they sit through seasons that go nowhere, and still they take notes, still they analyze, still they look for something to explain or build on. For someone to say publicly that they stopped because the team had clearly given up, that's not frustration, that's resignation. What made it worse was how casual the admission sounded. Not angry, not shocked, just tired, as if quitting had become expected, as if this was simply the natural endpoint of something that had been unraveling for weeks. The language they used was brutal, not smart, not accountable, not tough. Those aren't terms thrown around lightly in NFL circles, especially by people who know they'll be hearing from the organization later in the week. And yet, there it was, an indictment of the culture, not just the performance. And it didn't stop there. Another comment cut even deeper. The idea that if the team was going to quit on the season, then the media might as well quit fighting for it too. That there was no reason to care more than the players themselves. No reason to invest emotionally when the effort wasn't being returned. That's when you knew something had shifted. Because once the people who make a living covering the team emotionally check out, it means the disconnect has gone far beyond X's and O's. It means belief is gone. It means whatever message is being delivered inside that building is no longer landing. And when that happens, seasons don't just end, they rot from the inside. What's most telling is that these comments weren't immediately pushed back on. No strong rebuttal, no unified defense, just silence. And silence in moments like this speaks louder than any press conference ever could. But the most alarming part wasn't that the media said the players had quit, it was who they quietly pointed to as the reason why. This is where the conversation shifts from what happened on the field to what might be happening behind closed doors, and it's important to be clear about that distinction. What follows isn't a confirmed report. It's not an official statement from the organization. It's a growing belief among media members and longtime observers who've seen this pattern before. And the pattern they're pointing to is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to an NFL team: a head coach losing the locker room. According to several voices in Cleveland media, the effort, or lack of it, during that game didn't look like confusion or youth. It looked like detachment. Players going through the motions, missed tackles that felt like business decisions, body language that said more than words ever could. And while no one has come out and said, this is exactly when it happened, the suggestion is clear. Something has fractured internally. When teams still believe, they fight. Even in bad seasons, even when the playoffs are out of reach, belief shows up in how players finish games, how they respond after mistakes, how they rally when things start to slip. What media members say they saw instead was acceptance, as if the outcome was already decided. That's why so much of the criticism has quietly drifted upward. Because when multiple players appear disengaged at the same time, it's rarely about individual effort. It's about trust. Trust in the message, trust in the plan, trust that what you're being asked to do actually matters. And once that trust erodes, no amount of talent can save you. Media members have framed this not as a one-game issue, but as the breaking point of a season filled with vague explanations and shifting responsibility. They've suggested that accountability feels uneven, that discipline hasn't been consistent, that players aren't being challenged or protected in ways that inspire buy-in. Again, this is speculation, but it's informed speculation, the kind that comes from people who've watched NFL locker rooms fall apart before. And the most telling part? The lack of pushback. No strong denial, no clear, unified message saying, that's not who we are.
just more explanations, more context, more reasons why things didn't go right. In the NFL, perception becomes reality faster than most teams realize. Once players believe the message isn't working, it doesn't matter how many meetings you hold or how detailed the game plan is. The room tunes out. And when that happens, seasons don't spiral, they collapse. But if the idea of a fractured locker room felt unsettling, the next detail is what really sent people down the rabbit hole. Because it wasn't about effort or attitude, it was about a small piece of plastic on a quarterback's wrist and 3 very different stories about what went wrong. It should have been a minor footnote, the kind of thing that gets mentioned once during a broadcast and forgotten by the next drive. Instead, it became the moment that made people stop and ask uncomfortable questions. Because once the explanations started coming out, nothing lined up. During the game, a sideline report mentioned that Shedeur Sanders' wristband had been removed and adjusted. The wording was careful, but the implication was clear. Something wasn't right operationally. The offense had looked disjointed early, and now there was confirmation that changes were being made on the fly. No accusation, no blame, just an observation that immediately raised eyebrows. Then came the post-game explanations, and that's where the confusion began to snowball. Kevin Stefanski was asked directly about the wristband. His response was vague. He referenced a miscommunication early and suggested that something may have gotten on the wristband before it was fixed. Not that the wrong plays were necessarily on it, not that the system failed outright, just something. A non-answer that somehow created more questions than clarity. Because what does that even mean? This isn't a high school play sheet. These wristbands are laminated, protected, designed specifically so things don't happen to them. And when a head coach can't clearly explain what went wrong, people start filling in the gaps themselves. Then Shedeur Sanders was asked about it. His answer was simple, almost dismissive in how casual it was. He said the card fell out. That was it. No mention of wrong plays, no mention of miscommunication, no mention of something getting on the wristband, just that the card came out on the sideline. 3 explanations, 1 event. And that's when Cleveland media stopped giving the benefit of the doubt. Because none of those versions fully match. They don't even really overlap. One suggests operational issues, one suggests vague miscommunication, one suggests a simple physical mishap. And when stories don't align like that, especially in the NFL, people start to wonder whether someone is protecting something or someone. Several media members framed it carefully, but the implication was unmistakable. Somebody's version of events isn't accurate, and in their view, the rookie quarterback had the least to gain from bending the truth. He's been professional from the start. He hasn't thrown teammates under the bus. He hasn't made excuses. So why would he start now? That's the question hanging in the air. And this isn't happening in isolation. Media members quickly pointed out that this isn't the first time explanations from the coaching staff haven't quite added up. Past situations involving injuries, benchings, and late-game decisions were suddenly back on the table, not as proof of wrongdoing, but as part of a growing pattern that fans and reporters alike are growing tired of.
What made this moment different was how symbolic it felt. A rookie quarterback already under pressure, an offense struggling to function, a sideline adjustment that shouldn't happen at this level, and 3 different stories trying to explain it away. Whether intentional or not, it reinforced the perception that clarity is missing, and when clarity disappears, trust usually goes with it. And as that trust continues to erode, the focus shifts away from one wristband and towards something much bigger. Because if this level of confusion is showing up on game day, it raises a much harder question about what's happening the rest of the week. For a lot of Browns fans, the wristband situation didn't feel shocking. It felt familiar. That's the part that's really bothering people. Because the reaction wasn't, how could this happen? It was, here we go again. Another confusing explanation. Another situation where the story changes depending on who's talking. Another moment where accountability feels blurred just enough to avoid landing anywhere specific. Cleveland media picked up on that immediately. They started connecting dots, not to accuse, but to contextualize.
pointing back to past moments where the explanation after the fact didn't quite match what fans saw with their own eyes. A player benched for performance, only for injury to be cited later. A decision framed one way during the week, then reframed once questions got uncomfortable. Individually, those moments might seem harmless. Teams adjust narratives all the time, but when they stack up, they create a pattern, and patterns change how people listen. That's why the frustration now sounds different. It's not outrage anymore, it's exhaustion. Media members openly mocked the revolving door explanations: injuries, depth, youth, execution, circumstances. Every week, it's something new. And while every team deals with adversity, not every team explains it away the same way. Other rosters face the same injuries, the same backups, the same bad luck, and still manage to compete. That comparison keeps coming up, not to embarrass the Browns, but to highlight how thin the excuses are starting to feel. Fans hear "next man up," then watch special teams collapse. They hear about roster limitations, then see teams with similar limitations out-execute them. And eventually, the message stops landing, not because it's wrong, but because it's overused. That's where the phrase "team of excuses" started circulating. Not from one bad game, but from a season's worth of explanations that never quite lead to solutions. Every answer feels temporary, every fix feels cosmetic, and nothing ever feels fully owned. What's striking is that this frustration isn't coming from unrealistic expectations. Browns fans are used to adversity. They don't demand perfection. What they want is honesty, clarity, and signs that mistakes are being confronted head-on. Instead, what they feel like they're getting is spin. And once that perception sets in, it poisons everything else. Because now, even legitimate explanations get questioned. Even real injuries get side-eyed. Even honest mistakes feel suspicious. Trust erodes slowly, and then all at once. Which is why, when the conversation circles back to Shedeur Sanders, the tone changes again. Because in the middle of all this noise, he represents something the fan base hasn't had in a long time, and that contrast is impossible to ignore. That's where Shedeur Sanders stops being just part of the story and starts feeling like the center of it. Because when everything else feels unstable, when explanations keep shifting, effort is being questioned, and belief is fading, people naturally gravitate toward the one thing that feels consistent. And right now, that's the rookie quarterback. What's standing out isn't just how he's playing, it's how he's carrying himself. Veteran teammates have gone out of their way to point it out. Not with hype, not with empty praise, but with quiet respect. The kind that usually takes years to earn in an NFL locker room. When Joel Bitonio said, "Hopefully we can improve around him," that line landed heavy. On the surface, it sounds supportive, encouraging even, but read a little deeper and it sounds like something else entirely, an acknowledgement that the environment around Sanders isn't matching his approach, that the structure meant to help him grow is falling short. That's not a shot, it's a reality check. Sanders is doing what coaches beg young quarterbacks to do. He's staying composed. He's absorbing criticism. He's taking hits without melting down. He's not deflecting blame even when it would be easy to. And in return, he's been placed in situations where everything has to be perfect just for the play to survive. That's not development, that's survival. And fans are noticing. Media members are noticing, because there's something deeply uncomfortable about watching a rookie take the brunt of dysfunction while the messaging around him remains cloudy. When things go wrong, the explanations feel vague. When things go right, they feel temporary. And through it all, Sanders keeps answering questions the same way: short, professional, and careful not to throw anyone under the bus. That restraint is admirable, but it also puts him in a vulnerable position. Because when a young quarterback becomes the emotional stabilizer of a struggling team, something is backward. He's supposed to be supported by the system, not shielding it. And the longer that dynamic continues, the louder the concern becomes. This is where the stakes really rise.
Cleveland doesn't just risk losing games, they risk wasting time, wasting development, wasting the most important window in a quarterback's career. The period where confidence is built or broken.
And once that damage is done, it doesn't always show up immediately. Sometimes it lingers, quietly, long after the season is over. That's why the conversation around Sanders feels urgent, not traumatic, urgent. Because if the organization truly believes in him, if they see what veterans like Betonio are seeing, then the question becomes unavoidable. Is the current structure helping him grow or slowly grinding him down? And that leads directly to the question everyone in Cleveland is circling, whether they want to say it out loud or not. And that's the question that refuses to go away. Is this just a bad stretch in a difficult season, or is this the moment everything finally cracked? Because when you step back and look at the full picture, it's hard to ignore how all of these threads connect. A veteran leader pushing through injury while trying to hold things together, a rookie quarterback absorbing hit after hit without a single public complaint, media members openly admitting they've emotionally checked out, conflicting explanations that create more confusion than clarity. None of that exists in a vacuum. This doesn't feel like one loss. It feels like the end of belief. Teams can survive injuries. They can survive youth. They can even survive bad luck. What they can't survive is a loss of trust inside the locker room, between players and coaches, and between the organization and the people watching every week. Once that trust is gone, everything else starts to unravel fast. What makes this situation especially heavy is the timing. Shedeur Sanders is still at the beginning of his journey. This is the phase where habits form, confidence takes root, and a quarterback learns what winning football is supposed to feel like. And right now, he's learning those lessons in an environment filled with noise, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. That should worry everyone. Because if veterans are quietly signaling frustration, if media members are reading between the lines, and if fans are no longer surprised by dysfunction, then the issue isn't perception anymore, it's reality. And realities like this don't fix themselves without real change. So the lingering question isn't just about one coach or one decision, it's about direction. About whether accountability will finally replace explanations, about whether the organization is willing to confront what's clearly not working before more damage is done. Most of all, it's about whether Cleveland is prepared to protect what it might have in Shedeur Sanders, or risk watching another promising chapter slip away under familiar circumstances. Because moments like this define franchises, and the longer this question goes unanswered, the louder the consequences become.